Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening across the Big Blue View Radio network, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, looking ahead to Monday night's Giants-Seahawks Week 4 game at MetLife Stadium. I'm joined today by John Gilbert, deputy editor of SB Nation's Seattle website Field Goals to look ahead to that game. John, thank you very, very much for a few minutes.
Well, thank you for having me on. Happy to discuss Seahawks, anytime I can, and it's always good to get out to new audiences. So, looking forward to it.
All right. You guys do a podcast as well?
We do not anymore. We had one, and then it unfortunately got caught up and discontinued in the changes this spring. And so we've got some unofficial ones that we do regularly, but not one that is site driven.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, that was unfortunate. But anyway, let's get into Giants and Seahawks on Monday night. And I have to start with former Giant Julian Love. Julian Love was a guy, 4 years with the Giants. A lot of those years he spent as a backup. Giants used to call him sort of the duct tape for their secondary. He wasn't necessarily a starter, but wherever they needed him, they would plug him in and he would do an adequate to better than adequate job. Last year, he was a starter for them, one of their team captains, had a really good year. A lot of Giants fans not understanding why he's in Seattle and not still with the Giants. But the question for you, John, is what is he giving the Seahawks at this point? Are you guys happy with the acquisition? What's he bringing to Seattle right now?
I'm stoked with the acquisition. I love the signing back in the spring. I still love it. The secondary as a whole has had some struggles initially, early in the season, but that's in part because of new faces. They drafted Devin Witherspoon, they signed Julian Love, and it's a lot of guys who weren't playing a lot of snaps last year. And then, Reek Woolen was out for almost all of training camp with an injury. So it's just they're still learning, they're still getting together. Love has made a couple of fantastic plays. He's still, he's had a couple of plays where fans have blamed him for a completion or whatever. But right now, the first 3 weeks, he's been filling in for Jamal Adams at strong safety, kind of the jack of all trades, as you mentioned earlier, where he filled with the Giants. Obviously Adams expected to come back. Pete Carroll says he's going to be playing on Monday night, so we'll get to see him. I'm assuming he's going to be filled in, come back in some kind of strong safety role, filling a lot of the role that Love had been playing. And so it'll be interesting to see, will Love move into the slot? Will he play more corner? Will they? I mean, I'm sure they're going to do some kind of safety rotations. He'll play back somewhere, he'll play up some in the box, play the slot. But it's going to be. I think right now it's a very interesting point of the season in terms of the secondary, because we're going to get to see a lot more of the dynamism out of Love that we haven't seen yet so far, because he's basically been playing strong safety while Adams recovered from his 2022 injury.
How big for Seattle is the return of Jamal Adams? He's a guy who, he's been looked at as a top tier safety, but then he's also been looked at as a guy who's a liability in coverage at times. How big is the return of Adams to the Seattle lineup?
I think from an energy perspective, I think there's no doubt that that's going to help. It's not going to hurt. Exactly how fully recovered he is, I think a lot of people will have their eyes on that. It's an injury. A torn quadriceps tendon is not something that players typically come back from at 100% compared to where they were before pre-injury. So maybe there's some burst missing, maybe there's some speed missing. That's what I think a lot of people are going to be interested in watching. But in terms of where he can fill in, I think the biggest thing is, if he's in a position where they've got two guys who can play strong safety, they've got guys who can play the slot corner, they can use him as kind of a jack of all trades and not have to rely on his high level of athleticism, and allow him to do the things that he can do best in terms of the next few weeks as he gets back up to speed, gets into game speed, NFL game speed. That said, Seattle right now is sporting, I believe it's the 29th ranked scoring defense in the NFL, and I'm not expecting, just the addition of Jamal Adams to improve that into a top 10 or a top 5. I think it won't hurt, but it's just going to take a whole lot of practice reps, a whole lot of weeks where these guys are together in and out, day in, day out, getting reps with one another, understanding what each other is going to do on in different situations, in different coverages, so that there aren't communications breakdowns like there have been in the first few weeks where there have been, busted coverages and guys going for long touchdowns because they've been left wide open in the secondary.
I was going to say, you mentioned it, 29th in the league, I think, in points allowed. What is the story with the Seattle defense? I mean, the Giants are, I think, 31st in the league in points scored at this point. Their offense has not been anywhere close to what it was expected to be. Some of that is injuries to Barkley. Some of that is injuries to a couple of the starting offensive linemen, including Andrew Thomas. But if you're the Giants this week, what is it about the Seattle defense that can be taken advantage of?
It's that secondary. It's not that they're bad players in the secondary. Everybody in their own on their own is a good player, but playing in the secondary, stopping the pass in the NFL, there's got to be coordination. There's got to be, especially with the amount of zone defense and everything that these teams are playing, it's every week there are consistent communications breakdowns. And then in week 1, Matthew Stafford, I mean, he just absolutely shredded the intermediate zones. He knew exactly where his receivers were going. He knew which holes they were going to sit in, and he was throwing the ball as they were breaking across behind the linebackers. And if you look at like PFF or one of the advanced stats, you'll see, they'll blame Julian Love for getting shredded in week 1, allowing, so many receptions, so many yards. But it's a simple fact is that he happened to be the closest defender as the receiver was streaking through his zone, and and he caught the ball there. The big thing, like I've said, is it's just going to come down to getting everyone on the same page so they know where they're supposed to be and playing assignment sound. And until they get there, they're going to be, a bottom ranked defense or towards the bottom, because the run defense has been phenomenal. Teams are running at about 3 yards a carry. They're not allowing big yardage on the ground. They're stopping the run. And unfortunately, at this point, the pass by forcing teams to pass, teams are opting not to run the ball at 3 yards a carry and throwing the ball at 8 and 9 yards a carry, 8 and 9 yards a pass attempt, which is not great to keep other teams out of the end zone. So if the Giants are able to move the ball through the air consistently, then it could be an issue for Seattle on Monday night.
The Giants have struggled to protect Jones. I think he's been hurried, I think, on 47% of his dropbacks this season so far. And I think there's only 3 quarterbacks that have been hurried more often. What does the Seattle pass rush look like? Is this a week where maybe the Giants could give Jones a chance to sit in the pocket a little bit and read the defense and make some throws?
It's one of those things where it's one of those situations where something's going to have to give, because this is either going to turn into a get right game for the Giants offensive line or a get right game for the Seahawks pass rush. They showed some pass rush life in the second half against the Panthers, but the Panthers are, their offensive line is right up there with the Giants in terms of pressures allowed this season. They might be one of those teams that's higher than 47% pressure rate. They did get a couple sacks. They did keep Andy Dalton under pressure, especially in the second half. But it's for all the talent, for all the high draft picks that they've spent on the defensive front, for signing Draymond Jones in free agency and Uchenna Nwosu and giving him an extension, and then back-to-back second-round picks on Derek Hall and Boya Mafe, and the second-round pick in 2020 on Darrell Taylor. This is a front seven that has, the team as a whole has 3 sacks in the first 3 games, and one of those was on a corner blitz by Trey Brown. So it's been rough. There has not been a huge amount of pass rush. Like I said, it's going to be a get right game for one of the groups. It's just going to come down to is the Giants O-line going to look good, or is the Seahawks pass rush going to look good? Obviously, I'm hoping it's the Seahawks pass rush, but we'll find out on Monday night.
John, let's talk about the other side of the ball. the Seattle offense has put up 37 points in each of the last 2 games. What's going on there? What's been the big reason for success so far from the Seattle offense?
Week 1, they struggled in the second half when they lost both starting tackles, both Abe Lucas and Charles Cross due to injury. Lucas is on injured reserve. He's obviously not going to play this week. Cross has been listed as day-to-day for 2 weeks now, and he's been out the last 2 games. I'm not expecting him to play. Give him the week off. He gets the Seahawks have the bye week in week 5, so that gives him a couple more weeks to recover from his turf toe, which is an injury that if you re-aggravate it, the whole healing process starts all back over. So with that in mind, my guess is in week 1, what they did was they were looking for the deep ball. They were going for the kill shot. They were trying to look at DK Metcalf deep, trying to get Tyler Lockett in the deep intermediate. And the Rams had it covered, and the pass rush got there, and Seattle could not move the ball. In weeks 2 and 3, with those 37 points each week, they moved the ball consistently. Geno was slinging it. They got the ball out. In week 2 against the Lions, Pete Carroll's a guy who likes a coach who loves to throw deep, wants the deep shot, has all of his receivers, his guys who run 4.4 40s, 4.38 40s. And the longest reception by a wide receiver in week 2 against the Lions was 18 yards. It's quick dropbacks, it's quick game. Geno's getting the ball where it needs to be, when it needs to be there. He's making the proper reads. There have been a couple of ugly throws, at times, but it's simply because they've been slinging it all over the yard, and he's been phenomenal the last 2 weeks.
So how happy are you that Russell Wilson is in Denver?
I'm ecstatic. This is, it's one of those things where, Russ was fantastic, but he brought his own host of issues, and it was, the constant complaining about the offensive line and going on national TV and saying he's tired of being hit. And, it's the hot dog meme all over. It's like, Russ, sacks are a quarterback stat. Pressure is a quarterback stat. There's a reason Tom Brady consistently got sacked the fewest amount of times in the NFL. The same with Peyton Manning. Eli Manning. They made the reads, they knew what they were doing, and they got the ball where it needed to be. Russ is a quarterback who he has never been able to take the step from, where the high level of elite production, but he did it in a non-standard manner. He ran around a lot. He got the ball on the scramble drill, the deep pass, which is great, but it's not replicable in the way that, like Eli or Brady or Peyton did. And Geno, he's obviously still relatively inexperienced compared to, some quarterbacks. I think even Daniel Jones has more NFL snaps than Geno Smith does at this point. But so he's still learning. Third and long, second and long passing situations have been one of his weak spots in his year plus as a starter in the Seahawks. But he's been getting the ball where it needs to be, and he's looked better on third downs this year than he did last year. They're still struggling to convert. They're still in a lot of third and longs. They haven't been staying on schedule. Ken Walker at running back is one of those. He's a boomer bust kind of runner. He doesn't have quite the highest success rate in the league, but when he does break one, it's a good chance it's because he bounced it to the outside and he's got crazy speed. He's going to take it for 12 or 15 or 18 or even longer. And so if they can find some kind of balance, they can get to where they're staying on schedule and Geno's not facing 3rd and 9, 3rd and 12 consistently, then that's when the Seattle offense is at its strongest. When they are looking for that deep shot, run, pass is just it's a bad recipe to have with Geno at quarterback if you're left in 3rd and long, because, you Giants fans put up with Geno as a starter for exactly one game. Kind of saw in a microcosm. I know it was 5-6 years ago now, but his game he hasn't had a whole lot of playing time since then. He's got a little over a season of work, and it's just the same third down issues that he displayed with the Giants are kind of the issues that he still has now. They're better. He's improving. He's better this year than he was last year. But like I said, he's still relatively inexperienced as an NFL quarterback, despite having been in the league for over a decade. And it's just a matter of, as he gets more experience, as he sees those third down situations, reads the defense more, he'll get that ball out quicker and avoid the issues that we've been seeing.
John, before we move on, I do have to say one thing about Geno Smith as a Giant, since you brought it up. That whole mess with Geno Smith being the starter in the game where Ben McAdoo benched Eli Manning, breaking Manning's streak of 210, 211 straight starts, something like that. That's not Geno Smith's fault. Geno Smith played okay in that game. He didn't play great. Geno probably got a little bit vilified for that. It wasn't his fault. It was a situation Ben McAdoo put him in that never should have happened. And in retrospect, you have to feel bad for Geno Smith. It just wasn't, it was not a good situation all the way around for the Giants. And it's a big part of the reason why neither Ben McAdoo nor GM Jerry Reese got to finish that season in their jobs with the Giants. So vilify Geno if you want for that, but that, it's water under the bridge. It was a long time ago, but it certainly wasn't his doing at all. It's not his fault that his name is attached to being the guy who started when Eli Manning didn't.
No, absolutely. 100% agree. And I lived in New York for 10 years. I have a ton of friends who are Giants fans, and, they'll be more than happy to tell you that, you know, there were issues that went far, far beyond the quarterback position for that Giants team. And you were talking about the Giants being one of the worst offensive lines, at least so far this season. And, I could line up a parade of people who have vouched that the offensive lines that Jerry Reese ran out there were among the worst in the leagues as well.
Unfortunately, the Giants are still chasing the solution to that. It's one of those deals where they had an offensive line back in their championship days. They had an offensive line that was considered one of the best in the league, and they let that offensive line get old and they didn't supplement it. And by the time they started chasing the fix, that line was already broken. And they've spent a decade now chasing the fix and still really haven't nailed it. And unfortunately, that's what happens, I think, in a lot of cases with NFL teams. When you allow something to break, it takes a long time to put it back together. So
nope, 100%. Go ahead.
That's actually a good segue into something else I wanted to talk to you about. One of the decisions that the Giants made a year ago in trying to fix that offensive line, they had 2 picks in the top 10 of the draft. The direction they chose to go in was use the number 5 overall pick on Kayvon Thibodeau rather than take their choice of the top 3 offensive tackles. So Ike Ekwonu went to Carolina at 6. And then the Giants chose between Charles Cross, who landed with you guys in Seattle, and Evan Neal. Hasn't been pretty so far with Evan Neal at right tackle. Had a really rough rookie season, got hurt in the middle of it, and I think that had something to do with it. Hasn't been great so far this season. Had a really, really rough week 1 against Dallas. I think he allowed 8 pressures. On paper, Charles Cross has been much better if you go purely by the Pro Football Focus grades. Just your thoughts on Charles Cross, and from the evidence that we've seen so far, whether you think the Giants made a mistake.
Personally, I do. Not to rub it in, but I'm ecstatic that we have Cross. We can talk PFF, we can look at the grades, we can look at the pressures. When you look at it, Cross, if you look at the pressures allowed, he'll be in the bottom 5 for most pressures allowed during the 2022 season. But he did that playing almost every snap. I think it was 1 or 2 snaps that he missed at the end of the year. He rolled his ankle or something in a game and it came out for a couple snaps. But then if you look at the stats when they're released for, amount of, double teams or chips or tight end help that the tackles are being given, he was almost at the bottom of the league in terms of help that he was given. So he is realistically, he was right up there performing with someone, in terms of pressures allowed per snap, pressures allowed per drop back, like an Orlando Brown as a rookie without being given any help. And it's, to see that from someone who has a high level of athleticism, and he's extremely young. I forget he's 22 or 23 still. That's a position that you could have locked down for the next decade, and with his athleticism, it's the kind of athleticism that you can see someone where their career, I'm not going to say that he's going to play until he's almost 40 like Andrew Whitworth or Dwayne Brown, but that's the athletic category that he falls into. And that's the kind of, athleticism that can be predictive of a career that could potentially be 10 or 12 years long. And to have, if you can lock down an offensive line position, a left tackle position for a decade, that's an absolutely phenomenal place to be.
And he is playing the left side, correct?
Correct. Yep. He's on the left side, and then third round pick Abe Lucas in 2022 was on the right side. Lucas will not be playing on Monday, so we'll see. Obviously, the injury report will be key. My guess is we don't see Cross on Monday. We'll see fourth year man Stone Forsythe, third year. But that'll be, we'll obviously find out on Saturday when the injury report comes out.
All right. So let's finish up with this and make a prediction if you want to, but and don't make one if you'd rather not. But how do you see the game unfolding? And it's a relatively close point spread. I think it started with Seattle favored, and it's kind of swung to the Giants by a point or a point and a half. It's in MetLife. It's a game the Giants, to be honest, desperately need to win. They're 1-2. They've got road games after Monday night at Miami and at Buffalo. So it's a game they desperately have to have. How do you see the game unfolding? And if the Giants are going to win it, what does that look like?
If they can win it, it's going to have to look like, them throwing the ball. They're going to need to move the ball through the air. The Seahawks have been stout against the run, and they'll force Daniel Jones to beat them with his arm. They'll do what they need to do to stop the run. That's Pete Carroll's first priority. Make the Giants one-dimensional, and then force the receivers. Obviously, last year that worked fantastically when they played because I think you guys were without your wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and wide receiver 3 due to injury, and so he just didn't have any weapons, and Seattle was able to have a pretty easy victory. I'm not expecting it to be that easy this year, but it's a Pacific Coast team, West Coast team playing in prime time against an East Coast team, and that historically 65% of the time roughly favors the West Coast team. I don't know if it's time difference or what, but it's and the Seahawks always play well in prime time. Pete Carroll always has his guys ready to go in prime time. So I think it'll start off ugly. It'll be some back and forth. But my guess is it'll end up being, at the end of the day, it's probably going to be a one-score Seattle win, whether that's something like a 27-23 or, 30-25, something along those lines. That's kind of what I'm expecting from the game.
And Giants fans know that they historically do not play well in prime time. I think Daniel Jones has the worst record of any starting quarterback ever in prime time, which blame it on him if you want, but quarterbacks get numbers attached to them a lot of times that aren't necessarily their fault. Anyway, John, appreciate the time, appreciate the input. Folks, check out Field Goals for the Seattle perspective as we lead up to Monday night. And Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.